Hey everyone. Today on the Imaginative podcast, we have Ted Shelton. Ted is the Chief Operating Officer at Inflection AI. Inflection AI is known for their Pi model, first and foremost. It's one of the first frontier models with emotional intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how it applies to the current landscape. But the company has evolved so much over the last year, and now they are offering some of the leading enterprise services. And so Ted is here to talk us through some of the new changes, some of the partnerships that they have with companies like Intel. Ted, thank you so much for joining us on Imaginative.
Oh, I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Awesome. So why don't we dive in? Ted, can you, for our listeners that may not be familiar with Inflection and just the innovation that you have produced in the year and a half that you've been founded and all the transformation that has happened, can you walk them through where Inflection is today, the past that you have, and some of the things that happened over the last year?
Sure, I'm very happy to, Chris. Inflections, a really special company in the AI space. The founders are Mustafa Suleiman and Reid Hoffman. Of course, your listeners probably know Reid Hoffman as the founder of LinkedIn. And he was, of course, also an early board member and investor in OpenAI, has a
Mhm.
really keen interest in generative AI as a category. And of course, Mustafa was a founder of DeepMind in London in 2010, which of course was bought by Google, so became Google DeepMind. And it was the team at DeepMind that wrote what's now become a really well-known paper called "Attention is All You Need" back in
Yeah.
2017. And what's interesting is if you actually trace the DNA of every one of the generative AI projects that's out there, you can find that there's a thread that leads right back to that team. Um,
Yeah. Wow.
and of course, Mustafa himself then left Google and with Reid in January of 2022 founded Inflection. And the hypothesis that led to the founding of Inflection was that the creation of a large language model, frontier model, was actually a straightforward engineering exercise at that point. At least if you were a part of that Google DeepMind team, maybe not for the rest of us. But that you had to have a large amount of training data and you had to have a large number of GPUs, but sort of the science of it was understood. And as a research team, what Mustafa was interested in was understanding sort of the next frontier of, well, what do we do next now that we have these large transformer models? And his question was, how do we actually create one that's really good to interact with? So
Mm.
think about the human computer interface component of this. And so
Yeah.
the initiative that his research team took was to say, let's figure out how to adjust the model in a way where, in the case of Pi, it is kind, generous, supportive, high emotional intelligence, as you said.
Mhm.
And the techniques that they developed, which we are continuing to use today now for the enterprise, are primarily focused around fine tuning and reinforcement learning. And so we'll talk more about that maybe as we progress. Now, they started out with this focus on a consumer application, Pi, but the realization was that, the consumer space is actually going to be a pretty tough place for generative AI companies to succeed in,
Yeah.
given that you've got Microsoft, Google, now Apple,
Yeah.
Meta, Amazon, right? How many trillion-dollar companies do you want to fight with at once? And so the board made the suggestion last year, hey, maybe we should actually focus on a commercial model with enterprises rather than continuing the consumer development. Now, Mustafa and his team were actually really dedicated to the consumer mission. And so they made the decision to leave and go to Microsoft. And of course, Mustafa is now the CEO of AI for Microsoft. And Microsoft licensed the inflection model. And if you
Yeah.
go to copilot.microsoft.com, you'll see something that looks a lot like Pi because it is. It is Pi. So they have a non-exclusive and perpetual license, and they can go do whatever they want with it. They don't own any part of our company. They paid us for the license fee. We still own the technology. And so Reid Hoffman put together a new refounding team and asked all of us to help him do a restart to really focus on the enterprise. And that's really where I come in. I was a partner with Bain and Company and focused on serving large enterprises as a part of the enterprise technology practice at Bain and talking to them about the kind of transformation that generative AI might lead to in their businesses. And it was the insights that I gained in interacting with enterprises there that I was able to bring to this effort to refound Inflection.
Wow. It's an amazing journey. Congrats, first of all, on the refounding and just on the journey so far. I think it's really interesting when you look at how people react to when they interact with Pi. they really have an emotional connection with that model. And we have seen them use Pi for so many things. And to know to take that foundation, your knowledge of building frontier models, and to offer it to the enterprise, I think it's brilliant. One of the things I've said in the past is the business case for consumer AI hasn't really been made as yet. It's really difficult to break into the consumer market. And so I think it makes sense that you will have the big tech companies going after that market because of the access that they already have. And for you to focus on enterprise, because of course, enterprises are going to be willing to invest the money that it will take and the resources to build technologies based on this new type of intelligence. So let's talk a little bit more about the new Inflection. Let's talk about what you're offering to businesses, why they should be excited, and where Inflection fits in the current landscape of the alternatives that may be on the market.
Sure. Well, I think the first insight that informed our approach was that all of the commercial models that are available today
Mm.
uh, require that a company be willing to put their proprietary information into a cloud-based environment where a vendor still has access to that information. So, I go to OpenAI and I say, I'm a large enterprise. I want to have a dedicated instance. And OpenAI is more than willing to promise me that they're not going to steal my information, which is
Yep.
fantastic, great legal protection. But from a practical perspective, you still have OpenAI employees that run the model. You do
Mhm.
not have your company's employees. So companies can't actually own the technology themselves. And that's why a lot of companies have then said, well, wait, maybe we should experiment with open source. And Meta, Zuckerberg has been happy to fuel that side of the equation and erode OpenAI's market share in the enterprise by giving Llama away for free. But in a lot of ways, it's really not the same kind of solution, right? So OpenAI is a full AI compound application stack with a whole set of components that allow for very sophisticated things to be done beyond just what the model does,
Mhm.
whereas Llama is just a model. So to paraphrase that that old article, attention is all you need. A model is not all you need. You actually need the enterprise needs a lot more than just a model to be able to be successful. And so, while companies want to own and run their own technology, the first thing they run up against is, hey, I actually need a lot more than a model. And then the second thing they say, hey, is this model good enough? Does it do the things I need to do? And then the third question, and I hear this from security, heads of security at some of these large enterprises, look, we actually really don't know what Meta trained that model on. What data did they train it on? And without doing a full code review, do we really know what might be hidden in the code? And we don't have, Meta isn't going to stand behind it and support it or indemnify us for using it or anything, right? So as a large enterprise, with whether you're in a regulated industry or just have your very confidential proprietary data, that you're concerned about protecting. Open source may also not be a good plan. So that was sort of the first insight, is to say, gee, there's a market opportunity here to actually sell enterprise software. I know it's a sort of contrarian view because Silicon Valley is all about go cloud, cloud, cloud. And so we're going the reverse direction, right? No
Yeah.
cloud. And saying to customers, hey, you can own this and run this yourself. You can actually have security of supply, lower cost of ownership, complete control of your data, the ability to be able to tune and customize that model to your heart's content, and also a full application stack that is a compound AI application that does a lot more than just what a model does.
We talk about open source, but you're right. The Llama models technically aren't open source. They're just open weights.
I like
And
to call it
while
meta source.
exactly right. And while you do have open source models, I don't think they're going to be frontier models like Pi 3 and the models that you're offering. Can you talk us a little bit about the new Pi models and what companies can expect?
Yeah, and to shift the language you use a little bit, we refer to Pi as that personal intelligence that was developed for consumers, which, by the way, we still run. So Pi.ai is still up and running. We have no
Mhm.
intention of shutting it down, also on your iPhone and your Android phone. But Pi is that personality, that particular instance of our technology. We spent a lot of time out of the gate as part of the refounding, sitting
Mhm.
down with enterprise customers and asking them, what are the things that are really important to you about successfully adopting AI in your enterprise? And so, in addition, of course, to this first point that I made about companies want to own it themselves and run it
Yeah.
themselves, we heard three things. We heard, number one, that companies want to be able to customize that technology. Um,
Mm.
And so customize means go way beyond RAG, right? So it's like, great, I have all my information in my company and I want to have a better enterprise search capability. Fine. But no, what I really want is actually want an AI that's tuned to my industry, my company,
Mhm.
the culture, both the explicit knowledge and the implicit knowledge about how my company operates. So, a simple thing is, what are all the acronyms that we happen to use in our industry or our business? A more complex thing to know is, like, how do we expect our employees to interact with one another? What do they call each other? What do they, one of our potential customers I was talking to, and he said, yeah, when I first went to my first job, I was at Goldman Sachs, and I got a tap on the shoulder. So I always call this the tap on the shoulder now. I got a tap on the shoulder by one of the other employees who said, "Hey, when you write your summaries of what you've been working on, don't use I, use we."
Ooh,
Because here at Goldman, we want to feel like a team. We want everyone to be like, we're doing this together, not
interesting.
individual contributors, right? And that's the stuff that nobody writes down, but it becomes an important part of a culture. And every
Mm,
company has that their own culture. So how do you actually tune the model to be that culture? So that was the first thing we heard. Second thing we heard was, look, I think it's great to have a generative AI that can read things and summarize them and create new content. And yet, what I really need for this to add value is I need it to be able to take actions. So I need this element that's agentic, right? That I think that's a popular word now that's being bandied about, but we call it AQ. So there's IQ. So what's the intelligence? Can you answer the question? There's
mhm.
EQ. Are you good to interact with, right? And so now we're working on AQ, or action quotient, to
I
be
love
able
it.
to make sure that we have a reasoning engine that can understand what a user's intent is and be able to use the right tools then to be able to execute that intent. And in the enterprise, what we think that means is using a deterministic technology to actually execute the action. So probabilistic technologies like a large language model are fantastic for human interaction. But then when I want to go and interact with a core banking system, I don't want it to be probabilistic, right? I don't want it to be, hey, maybe Chris should have another $100 or maybe $100 less.
Yeah,
First, yeah,
no, exactly.
right? You want it to be like, no, follow this set of rules. If Chris has $100, he gets to keep the $100. Don't take it away.
Yeah.
So that's why we started to go down this path with our model and start to implement those two things. And then the third thing was a concern about the lock-in that NVIDIA has. And the concern that GPUs are, people are fighting over getting access to these GPUs.
Yeah.
See these stories about people going out to dinner, with Jensen Huang, begging him for more GPUs, right? And of course, that means that NVIDIA can charge a huge premium on their product as well, right? So we said, okay, well, we need to actually give our customers choice. So those are sort of the three things really consistently that we heard. And so Inflection 3.0, all the work we've been doing over the last 6 months has been really to address those three things. How do we make it easy for a company to tune the model to their own
Mhm.
culture? And how do we put that pipeline in place? How do we provide that agentic or action quotient AQ level to the product? And that's why we've partnered with UiPath as our first partner, anyway, in
Mhm.
the area of integrating with enterprise information systems and having a deterministic workflow over how to interact with those systems. And then the third thing we did is we removed all of the dependencies on CUDA, CUDA being the NVIDIA low-level libraries to access
Yeah.
our chips, so that we can run on other chipsets. And the first one that we've announced is Intel's Gaudi.
Wow. So I'm going to just dive in two things that you said there, Ted, because I want to be clear. You're actually giving your clients access to the models, the inflection models, to run on their own servers. How does that work?
Well, so two ways. I mean, I'm not exactly sure when you say how does it work. I'm not going to describe the mathematics, but from a practical perspective, in terms of them receiving the technology, we have two mechanisms that we use. One is we can ship them an actual physical device, and so that's why we partnered with Intel and now also with Dell, who's
Mhm.
manufacturing the actual product. Intel makes the chips, of course, and Dell makes the actual physical hardware. And so Dell will install that hardware in the company's data center um, with our software installed on it.
Oh,
And then we provide support and services capability to a company to say, here's how to operate it. And so that's one way. The other way is we can set it up in a cloud environment. as a dedicated compute resource, right? So unlike the OpenAI, and I'm not going to, it's not, by the way, just OpenAI, it's everybody else in the industry.
Yeah.
So, but unlike the way they do it, where they say, we're setting up this compute environment, it's dedicated to you, but we run it, right? We're not saying that. We're saying, no, we'll set up this dedicated compute environment and it is a part of your network and you run it, right?
Oh,
So it's like, okay, the physical machines are actually isolated and set up just for a particular customer's use, just the same they would be as they would be if they were sitting in a company's own data center, but they don't have to run it if
oh.
they don't want to.
And it's interesting because when I say how does it work, that requires a certain level of trust because you're giving them everything. Do
Yeah.
you think that's a problem moving forward, just from a defensibility standpoint?
So you're right that we are giving our crown jewels to our customers. And so that depends upon the trust that we have of our customers. And so you look at this relationship between the Gen AI vendor and the enterprise customer.
Hmm.
And one of those two parties is going to have to trust the other one. Either I'm going to have to trust OpenAI because I'm giving my data to them in a way that they access my data,
Hmm.
or the vendor, in this case Inflection, is going to have to trust the customer because I'm giving them my software and I have to trust them with my software. So one way or the other, it's going to be a trust relationship. Now, trust obviously is backed up by legal contracts and
Yeah.
liabilities if the trust is broken. But we think it is a more reasonable position for the large enterprise to be trusted with the software rather than to entrust their data.
Well, kudos to Inflection. I think it's brilliant. I think it speaks to the culture of the company. I had a chance to sit down with some of the members of the Inflection team at a recent conference in Boston. And I can tell you, everyone is passionate about the work that you're doing. They believe in supporting the customers that they're bringing on. I think enterprise clients that choose to work with you are going to be in for a great treat. Um, so congrats on that. Now, switching gears to the second part, which is the partnerships with like Dell and Intel. Talk to us a little bit about the new Intel chips that you're supporting and the partnership with Intel specifically.
As we thought about who we would want to part with, I mean, the first observation was, hey, for us to make this model work, we have to actually deliver hardware, right?
Mhm.
Because I think companies are struggling with the complexity of, how many GPUs do I need, and how do I configure them, and like, what's the ratio of GPUs to CPUs, and how much storage, all these questions. And so we just really wanted to make it easy. We wanted to, as one of the Dell execs said, it's that big red easy button, you know. And so we worked with them to define the hardware that would be necessary and work then with Dell to be able to manufacture that. And one of the reasons we picked Dell was because in talking again to our enterprise customers, we would talk to them about the different possible vendors that we would work with. And when we would say the word Intel, everyone would nod their head and go, yeah, that's a
Oh,
trusted enterprise vendor. We already use them in our data centers. If I was to walk in, like the guys at Grok are doing some amazing stuff with new inference chips.
mhm.
But you walk in and talk to a CIO and say, hi, I'm going to deliver Grok chips into your data center. And they're like, who the hell are you? Get out of here.
Very
But
cool.
Intel is a trusted name. And look, I think the Gaudi architecture is actually really interesting
Yeah.
for inference and very high performance and at a great cost price point. So we're also able to give our customers that security of saying, hey, I have choice now. I'm not stuck in only NVIDIA world.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant because that white glove service, so many enterprises don't want to get boggled down building AI models. They want to offer services and products. And the fact that you're leading with trust, I think it really differentiates you from a lot of the options that are on the market. The other thing I'd want you to just kind of explain a little bit more, you mentioned that it's more than a model and you're offering a lot of infrastructure for companies. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the specific offerings around safety and security that
Mhm.
you'll be helping enterprises to build into their tools?
Sure. You mentioned trust and safety. I mean, I think that's one of the really important areas. What you want is a model that is going to adhere to the values that you have as an organization, and those values may be different depending upon where in the world you are, and they may be different depending upon what industry you're in. And so, in certain industries, if I am in a defense industry, Lockheed Martin, right? My employees are going to talk about weapons systems. That's what they
Yeah.
build, right? Let's
Yeah.
face it. Like that's the point of the contribution that they're making to our national security. So you don't want a trust and safety system that shuts down when you start talking about weapons systems.
Very good point.
Uh, yeah. And by the way, not that Lockheed Martin is a client, but I'm making an extreme example. to make the point, right? That those components actually need to be customizable.
Yeah.
And so that's I think one of the really important points about why we think companies need to own their own AI is that then they can actually customize it for their own needs. I think the other really interesting element is in terms of the architecture of this compound AI system is the way that it allows us to add new components. Let's say you've actually invested in training a small model
Mhm.
on some particular information area of your business. And maybe it's your legal department. Maybe you've taken all of your legal contracts and said, look, we're
Mhm.
going to actually do a training run where all of our legal contracts are in this model so we can actually interact with them. Well, one way of deploying that and managing it as the enterprise is to say, oh, I've got all these little models that I built for all these special purposes, and I've spread them out all across the organization. And if you're an employee and you want to interact with one of those models, you have to know where that one is and how to get to it. Instead, what you can do is actually plug those models into our architecture so that we become the one conversational entry point
Mhm.
for the enterprise to be able to access all those resources. So that's another interesting aspect of it, is that ability to be able to extend for a given enterprise to the things that they find are important.
I love that. When I was looking through some of the technical documents, you mentioned even something called reinforcement learning through employee feedback, that the models ultimately will evolve with your organization. Can you share a little bit more about what the plans are for that?
Well, so let me actually roll back a little bit back to the history of the company again, because I think most of the large model builders have relied upon companies like Scale AI to help them with reinforcement learning. And
Mhm.
learning is is a very important part of making sure that you are tuning the model to. So they decided to build their own. So we have a complete RLHF platform of our own.
Mm.
And that effort to create Pi, part of that effort anyway, was recruiting 26,000 school teachers and university professors, paying
Wow.
them well, by the way, not
Wow.
the low wages that we hear about in some of these instances, and getting them to do that feedback. So, what does that feedback mean? It means, so there's the sort of very explicit, let me give you answer A and answer B,
Mm.
and tell me which one of those is a better answer, right? Another one is just is it good or is it bad, right? So lots of different ways you can get the feedback, but an important part of the platform is be able to manage all the participants and understand who's giving you good feedback or bad feedback. How do you weight the feedback from different reviewers? And so the platform does all of that. And so what we realized that an important part of being able to tune a model for a particular company was going to be that employee input.
Mm.
So if I were to go into a McDonald's versus an Intel, the kinds of concerns and the way in which we talk to each other and the
Mhm.
language we use, the examples that we give, all those things are very, very different. Um, and so what you want is to allow the employees to be able to say, hey, is this the right thing? I work for McDonald's. Is this the kind of thing I would say to one of my McDonald's colleagues? Is if I'm going to treat this AI as a coworker, I want it to talk like we do. I want it to have
Yeah.
the same values and respect. And so we are deploying that reinforcement learning platform into enterprises to allow employees to provide the feedback that allows them then to tune their own model. And what we believe is that then that's going to make these models an even more valuable asset to each company. It'll be a unique asset for that company. Intel's AI, not a generic AI that Intel shoved some information into.
I love that. And in terms of what this looks like, I had a chance to see some of the interfaces and use cases for how inflection models can be integrated. Can you share some use cases that you have been seeing from some of your customers and how they can expect to integrate this across multiple parts of their organization?
Sure. Well, look, I think the interesting thing that we all are coming to grips with, and we'll spend the next decade, I think, transforming around, is that we now have machine intelligence that can, do things that we would have normally attributed to a human, give you the kinds of answers and results that you want. And what the Inflection team realized early on was that actually using Scale AI or using one of these sort of generic aggregators of human input was not going to actually give them the quality of results that they wanted and level intelligence,
Mm.
but do them at a fraction of the cost and at exponentially faster speeds. And so that capability will transform everything that we do, not just in our work environment, but our personal lives as well.
Mm.
Now, our philosophy is that the creation of this technology And the way in which it is designed and deployed needs to keep the human at the center. We are emphatically not building artificial general intelligence. Like, we are not trying to replace human beings with a super intelligence. And there are a bunch of other companies in the field who are super excited about that potential future. We don't think that is human beings who are able to be the deciders and the directors of this machine intelligence. And so everything we're doing is about how do we design a support coworker that is looking to the human for that direction and that decision. So as we start to talk about the use cases, what you'll see is that's always sort of the central design principle for the way in which we would build and deploy this technology. So where are the places that are the top areas inside the enterprise? The two that come up most frequently are sales and software development. Very, very different, but both places where there's a tremendous amount of trapped value. So, if I take the sales example, typical salesperson in a large enterprise, B2B sales, might have 30 to 40 named accounts. So they're responsible for, hey, I'm selling my company's product, or if I'm Intel, I'm selling Intel's products into 30 or 40 different companies to help them build out a new hospital or whatever it happens to be, right? Now, as a salesperson, how many of those 30 or 40 companies am I capable of talking to at any given time? 3, 6, right? So it's somewhere like 10 to 20%, right? And how am I going to make my decision about which 10 to 20% am I going to talk to? I'm going to use my best judgment. I'm going to be like, yeah, I kind of like Kaiser, and I think they're building a new hospital, so I'm going to go chase Kaiser, right? But that's a disaster, right? That means that, out of my 30 or 40 named accounts, there's like 30 or 40 of them that I'm not talking to.
Yeah.
So the question is, how can you create a coworker that can pick up the slack and do a bunch of things for the salesperson that then allow them to have 100% account coverage, not 10% account coverage? So what's the research they can do? Can an AI go out and sort of survey everything that's going on with a given named account and say, hey, there was just a leadership change. There was just a new announcement made about a new facility that they're building. There's an earnings report out that says that they're in trouble because of X, right? And how does the AI then tee up the employee, the salesperson, to go, hey, here's the perfect message to send right now to this executive about this issue that's going to move the ball forward, right?
Yeah.
And if you can do that then and allow the salesperson to contact all 30 or 40 of their accounts, it's not that they will necessarily actually succeed in selling to 30 or 40 accounts. That's an exciting future. What we think is an exciting future. But instead of relying upon their judgment call about who to follow up with, you actually find out who actually wants to interact, right? And then you focus on your 3 or 4, right? So it's a
Yeah.
very different kind of model. The similar thing in the software development space, right? So just tremendous trapped value, because for any large company, not picking on any one of them, I think this is true of all of them, about 80% of their IT budget is spent maintaining legacy systems. And worse yet, those legacy systems, because of the limitations of those systems, are holding back the company from other transformations that they would want to make. So a typical large US bank is still running COBOL, right? To manage, seriously. Like, this is, in some cases, this is software that was put into production before there was a man on the moon.
That's
Um,
wild.
it is wild, and there's no one left who understands it either, right? And so, there's another example of unlock, right? But again, you don't want to like unleash a machine to just go rewrite all the software, right? You want to provide a system that's going to support the employee. So the developer is like looking at the code and going, I don't understand this, and so you want this coworker to be able to like dig through the code and go, okay, well, I think this is what it means. And then allow the developer to then be able to say, okay, how can I change it to redesign it to be more modern, and then have it make suggestions, right? Not rewrite it for the developer, but by providing that cognitive assistance, right, you can actually make the developer hundreds of times more productive. So that's
Wow.
the opportunity here. And by the way, in both of those cases, these are examples where the large enterprise really wants to keep their data secure, right? If I have a whole bunch of information about my customers and about their buying patterns and about what I think is going on in their industries and everything else, like, that's very sensitive information. I probably, some of it I'm willing to put into a salesforce.com, but some of it I don't want to, right? And so if I'm going to really get my insights, I need to be able to combine information that I might have on the public web, in my private environments like a Salesforce, and in my internal environments inside my company.
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of some of the challenges that enterprises are having. Because as an AI literacy platform, we see inside a lot of the conversations that leaders are having about deploying technologies, about adopting technologies, about the employees within the organization and how they're struggling to use the tools that are being bought in off the shelf. And so I
Mhm.
think you offer a really interesting value proposition for businesses. From your perspective, what do you think are some of the main blockers and challenges that enterprises have? And I know you touched on some of them, but where does Inflection really differentiate itself and
Mhm.
how can they help them to accelerate?
So let me suggest that there's three interesting things to focus on as an enterprise that I hear over and over again from the kind of companies that we're talking to.
Hmm.
Number one is this idea of sort of sprinkling AI like pixie dust across an organization and hoping for the best isn't working. I mean, I think in the long run, we'll all adopt all of these AI tools and we'll all be, happier, more productive, and more successful, et cetera.
Yeah,
But it's very hard to go and take a product like Copilot, not to pick on Microsoft, but to take a product like Copilot and say, hey, I'm going to charge you $30 a month. And then you sit there as a company and go, wait, $30 times 100,000 employees times 12 months. And how am I ever going to get that $30 million of value back? Right.
yep,
And so I think there's a huge challenge in that sprinkling the pixie dust thing. And so the first thing is really look for those trapped value opportunities. Where is there some really big opportunity to unleash revenue growth, cost reduction, transformation capability, and focus on that, invest in that. Because if you're successful there, then you have all the time in the world to spread the pixie dust.
exactly.
I'm not saying don't do the pixie dust, right? I'm just saying don't do it as the first thing.
Yep.
And that actually brings up sort of the second corollary, which is one of the things that enterprises are struggling with is that every single one of their existing enterprise software vendors is starting to introduce AI tools into their packages.
Hmm.
And so, now, okay, great. I've got a conversational interface to SAP, and now I've got a conversational interface to Salesforce, and now I've got a conversational interface to Workday. And
Yep.
it's like, how many conversational interfaces do I want? I want one. I want
Yep.
one. I don't
Yep.
want all these things, right? And so I think that's the second point is that there's this let's call it tech debt, right? But it's cognitive debt as well for all of your employees. In that it's like, damn it, I have to learn like basically the GUI problem is multiplied now by
Yep.
AI being embedded in every one of these systems. And instead, as an enterprise, what I should have is one AI over all of those systems, providing
Exactly.
a single entry point, right? So that's sort of, I think, the second interesting thing. And then, I think the third interesting thing is to ask the question about why does an employee choose to adopt or not a given technology? And it doesn't have to just be about AI. It can be any of the technologies that I introduce into an enterprise. It's a question of how easy and how approachable and how good to use that technology is it, right? So if it's a really painful experience, not to pick on you, SAP, people resist it. They're like, God damn it, I don't want to. It's a horrible experience, right? Whereas, if it's fun to use and easy to use, like my iPhone. I mean, why did the enterprise have to ultimately relent and let us all use iPhones? Because they're great to use, right?
Yep. Yep.
Employees want them. And so I think the same thing is going to be true for AI, and that's one of the things that I think is one of our superpowers because of the research work that was done by Mustafa and his team into human computer interface and how do we actually make AI better to interact with. Because as you said earlier in this episode, people love interacting with Pi.
Yeah.
Why? It's friendly, it's interactive, it's supportive, it's kind. Well, we want our enterprise AI to be that too, right? And we think that's going to be a big difference in terms of people going, yeah, I want to use this.
Wow. I love that. All right. So, Ted, before we wrap up, for companies that are interested in your offering, one, can you kind of just help them to self identify who are your ideal customers and then how can they reach you?
Yep. So I will say in the short term, we are focused really only on the largest companies in the world. And that is because it is very costly to deploy and own these systems. We will relentlessly drive that cost down over time. Moore's law is our friend. The cost of the compute is going to get cheaper and cheaper, and also our methodologies and our systems to support customers will get more and more fluid. So if you are a smaller or a medium-sized company today and you're like, I'd really love to do this, like give me a couple months or maybe a year. I will get to you. But right now, like there are basically 5 industries that care a lot about their data governance. And those are advanced manufacturing companies like Intel, energy and utilities. Thank you for protecting our critical infrastructure, financial services and healthcare, both highly regulated, and public sector, right? And that set of organizations, as you think about the largest, 50 or 100 companies in the world that are in those, or organizations in the world in those 5 categories, that is going to be completely our focus for the next, 6 to 12 months. And those companies can contact me directly through our website. We have a form to fill out. We can give you a demo, and we're more than happy to work with you. There is a minimum buy-in here of about $2 million, right? That is, that's a threshold of, if you really want to own your own AI and you have to run your own equipment, that is the least amount that you're going to get in the door for to start doing development and testing work. We already know, and I know from my work at Bain, that the largest enterprises are spending between $50 and $100 million a year right now on these initiatives.
Easily.
I'm not talking about something crazy for that scale enterprise.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. This was great. We definitely have to do it again. Thank you for sitting and chatting with me. I look forward to seeing what happens next with Inflection.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Imaginative is a leading AI literacy platform for businesses. We provide executive education, employee training, and advisor and consulting services to startups, leading brands, and global organizations. Check us out at imaginative.com, and you can find us on X and on LinkedIn. And you can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Until next time, one love.